My name is Jeff Ebbeler, and welcome to Art and Stories, brought to you by Happen Inc. I'm an author and an illustrator. I've illustrated chapter books, I do a comic series, and I've also written and illustrated a lot of picture books. Today, I am going to be reading a story called George the Hero Hound. Now, this is a story that I wrote and illustrated. So first I came up with the story, and then I did all the pictures for the story. And I'm going to be reading you the story, and then I'm going to show you some of the sketches and some of the paintings that I did for the book.
George the Hero Hound. George the Hero Hound. His name was George. He's a hero hound. His name was George. He's a hero hound.
Now, when I'm trying to come up with ideas for a story, sometimes I think of ideas off the top of my head. But a lot of times, I like to think about things that happen to me in real life. And I bet there are things that happen to you in real life that would make for some really good stories. So when I was sitting around thinking about what I can write stories about, I was thinking about when I was a little kid. My family, we lived near the city, but they always wanted to live in the country. And so one day, they packed us all up and we moved out to the country and we moved to a farm. And so our farm had a big field in front of it where we had corn, and we also had a bunch of animals. We had some cows, we had some pigs, we had some ducks, and we also had a pony. And we were really excited when we got this pony, and everyone wanted to give the pony a name. And we couldn't decide what we were going to name the pony, so my brothers and my sister and I, we all decided that instead of giving our pony one name, we would each come up with a name, and he would just have a really long name. So we ended up naming our pony Rusty Dusty Rover Red George. So this is a picture here of Rusty Dusty Rover Red George, and that's me riding him when I was a little kid. And so I was thinking that maybe that would be a good idea for a story. Maybe I could write a story about a family that moves out to the country and they meet an animal at their farm and they don't know what the animal's name is, so everybody in the family gives the animal a different name. But I was thinking, well, you know, ponies can't really get around and be very helpful in a farm the way maybe like a dog could, right? And so I made the main character a dog instead of a pony so he could go around the farm and help out the family. Now, there's one other thing that I want you guys to pay attention to as I'm reading the story. What do you guys notice on top of the barn here on the first page? There's some cows, right? And they're trying to escape from the barn. Well, when I was a little kid, like I told you, I lived on a farm and we had a big field with corn in it in front of our house. And our next door neighbors, they had a big field full of cows. And every once in a while, those cows would escape and they would break through the fence and they would get into our cornfield. And what do you think they did when they got in our cornfield? They would try and eat all the corn, right? So we would have to go and chase the cows back to their side of the fence. And so I thought that would be a funny thing to add to the story, to always have a bunch of cows that are trying to escape and get into the cornfield. So the story starts out, George was a good old hound dog. And you might even notice, even on the first page, you can see way in the background, there's a bunch of cows that are all making a little pyramid to try and escape the fence. Every day, George was up, even before the chickens, to help old Farmer Fritz with the chores. That rust bucket tractor was always falling apart, and those wily cows were always plotting to get out and feast on the cornfield. Now you can see here, George is helping out with the chores, and you might notice here, George, he's spying on the cows because they're making all sorts of plans. They're thinking about maybe they're going to dig a tunnel under the fence to escape, or maybe they're going to build a catapult to shoot one of the cows over the fence, or maybe even build a hot air balloon. And you can see down here, one of the cows is using a zip line to try and get across, but George is always there to stop them. But George didn't mind a whit. As long as he got his afternoon nap, he had a good life for a hound dog. Until the day old Farmer Fritz decided to retire and move to a cabana on the beach, where they didn't allow cows, they didn't allow pigs, and sad to say, they didn't even allow dogs. So you can see here, Farmer Fritz is talking to George and he's saying, "I'm sorry, boy, I need you to look after the farm." And George was left in the dust. Poor George. But not for long. Nothing could have prepared George for the Gladstone family. They packed up their noisy apartment in the city and bought Fritz Farm, cows, pigs, George, and all. So you can see here, there's Mr. Gladstone, and he's saying, look, we have a dog. I wonder what his name is. And the little boy Owen is saying, can I name him? And the mom is saying, Owen, keep an eye on your sister, because what's the sister doing? She's chasing after this chicken. George could tell right away that the Gladstone family would need a whole heap of help. There'd be no afternoon naps on the porch for a while. So you can see George here, he's coming up to Mr. Gladstone, who's trying to get the tractor started. And Mr. Gladstone is saying, could someone please hand me a wrench? And so George hands him a wrench, and he says, thanks, I can't figure out why this tractor won't start. And so George hands him a part, and Mr. Gladstone says, oh, this looks important. And then the tractor starts, and Mr. Gladstone sits up, and he's like, it works! And then he looks around, and he realizes that there's a dog that's been handing him all these parts. And he says, oh, hiya, Pooch, I didn't see you there. You're the same color as all these old rusty parts. Maybe we should call you, what do you think he's going to call him? Rusty, right? And then he leans on the tractor, and the tractor starts to drive away. And the dad chases after the tractor, and he's like, stop! But the tractor doesn't stop. It goes crashing through the fence, and all the cows are escaping, and they're jumping around in the cornfield having a good time, and George is trying to stop them. George watched as the tractor went clean through the fence, but he wouldn't let the cows get away on his watch. He spent the next couple hours trying to herd those sneaky cows back inside their pen where they belonged. And so George, he's all tuckered out. All he wants to do is get a cool drink of water and sneak a few winks in the shade. But he's going through the house, and the mom, she's unpacking all the boxes because they just moved in, and he's tracking all kinds of dirt from outside. And the mom says, look at my floor. You are the dustiest dog. Maybe we ought to call you. What do you think she's going to call him? Dusty, right? So George was swept out of the house in a cloud of dust. Now George shook himself off, and he was just padding towards his favorite shady spot when he spied something blue. Do you guys see something blue in the tree up here? Right, it's a ribbon. Does anybody remember who was wearing a blue dress at the beginning of the book? The little sister, right? So the older brother Owen comes running over, and he says, I was supposed to be watching my baby sister Olive. Can you help me find her, boy? George took a good sniff of Olive's ribbon. He was a hound dog, after all, and off they went. So you can see first, they're going to start looking for Olive in the cornfield. And have you guys ever been in a cornfield where the corn is so tall that you can't even see where you're going? Maybe you've been to a corn maze before. So they're going to search all over the farm. And first they're going to search in the creek. And you might notice one of those cows that escaped earlier in the story is in the background taking a shower in the waterfall. And then they're going to search through the woods. And you might notice there are a couple cows roasting some marshmallows back there. And then finally, they find that pint-sized rambler. And she's up on a hill, and she's having a tea party with that chicken that she was chasing after. And you may notice even in the background here, way back there, there's a little tiny hot air balloon with one more cow. So the older brother Owen looks around, and he says, wow, good boy. You tracked my sister across every corner of this farm. Maybe we should call you. What do you think he's going to call him? Rover, right? And you might see in the background, the dad, he's still chasing after that tractor. And there's one hidden cow way in the background. This is the hardest one to spot, hidden right there in the woods. So George had saved the day. And as he trotted back home, George was sure he would finally, definitely get that well-deserved nap. Until that tractor that the dad was chasing goes crashing into the barn. And the mom, she's up on a ladder painting the barn red, and she drops her bucket of red paint, and the bucket goes falling down until it goes splat right on George's head. And the baby sister Olive says, Red. And the mom says, Olive, you just said your first word. Maybe we should call you. What do you think she's going to call him? Red, right? And so from that day on, George didn't get many afternoon naps, but he didn't mind too much. It turns out he liked herding Olive a whole lot more than he liked herding cows. And since George figured the Gladstones needed some tips on how to run the farm, he vowed to teach them everything he knew, especially how to deal with those crafty cows. He even hatched a plan to drum up some business. So you can see here, do you remember that Farmer Fritz moved out to a cabana on a beach? Well, there he is on the beach with all his friends, and you can see Mr. Gladstone here. He's delivering some of the corn that they grew. And you might even notice in the background, there's one of those cows sitting under an umbrella eating some of the corn. And Farmer Fritz, he's over patting George on the head, and he's saying, "Hi there, George. Thanks for the delivery." Now, if only George could teach his family one last thing. What do you guys think is the one thing that George always wanted his family to know that he could never tell them? What do you think? His name, right? He always wanted them to know his name. And so here's George sitting in his doghouse, and you can see all these different signs that the family has put on his doghouse. It says Rusty, Dusty, Rover, Red. And right down here on his food bowl, if anyone would have looked, is his real name, George. So whenever I'm making the art for a new book, first I like to think about the characters. I like to gather up lots of pictures and lots of ideas for how I want the main character to look. I like to look at lots of pictures or go out in places to figure out how I want all the scenery in the story to look. And then I make lots of little tiny sketches, like about this big. They're called thumbnails. And so those sketches are just to figure out how I'm going to make every page look in the story. And after I've got all of those thumbnails figured out, I will turn those tiny little sketches into some bigger sketches, kind of like this. And so you can see in this sketch, this is where the tractor is broken through the fence and the cows are all escaping and getting into the cornfield. And after I'm happy with the way the sketch looks, I will turn that sketch into a painting, kind of like this. So this is one of the paintings from the book. And after I've done all of the paintings for the book, I will take all those paintings and I'll pack them all up and I'll put them in the mail. And I will send them off to the publisher. That's the place where they make the book. And they will take pictures of all my paintings, and they will use those pictures for the book. So you can see, for instance, this is the painting that I did for the cover of the book. And you might notice that at the top of the painting, there's a whole lot of empty space where there's just clouds. Do you know what that space is for? Well, this is the way that the cover turned out. And you might notice there's a lot of words at the top. So for the painting, I had to leave a lot of space for where the type would go. I'd like to thank Happen Inc. for inviting me to share my art and stories with you today. If you'd like to purchase a signed copy of George the Hero Hound, please contact Tish Gale at Inscribe Books. Thanks!